So this week we're going to be in week 2 of this series called Lead. And we started this last week. And here's the question that we're asking in this series. And it's for all of us to consider. The question is, do you see yourself as a leader? Do you see yourself as a leader? And maybe you don't. And that's too bad because you are. Maybe you don't realize that you are, but you are. Maybe you don't see, I don't have a position or a title. That may be even better. An even better position to be in for lifelong, everyday sort of leadership. If you're a parent, you're a leader. Whether they're small, medium, or large, or extra large, or whatever. Like, you're a leader to that group of people in your life. Even at your job, if you don't have the title on the door, on the desk, or on your name badge, it doesn't matter. You still have a certain amount of influence around the people that you work with every day. And so it's not just that we want to see it as influence, or we want to see it as an opportunity for leadership. That I have an opportunity through my life at home and at work and everywhere I go, my neighborhood. Maybe, again, we mentioned this last week, maybe your family's kind of the go-to family in the cul-de-sac. You know, they come to you with their issues and problems and questions and whatever, and you're just kind of, so we can tend to be like, oh, this is tiring and this is, sucking the life out of me, but see it as an opportunity for leadership in your everyday life. It's not about a title or a position or whatever. It's about the opportunity to lead no matter who you are or where you are in your life. If you don't see yourself as a leader, hopefully in this series that we'll see it's important that we do. That we utilize our influence, especially, we'll see this today, especially as Christ followers. So if you're a Christ follower, it's important that you see yourself as a leader in every area of your life, because the message that we have to share is the most important message ever, and it's worth sharing. And it's worth using what influence we have, what leverage we have in relationships and in different situations that we're in to find a way to work that in. It's important that we see that because the leader that we're following, who is Jesus, it's a pretty big deal. And so we want to use our life of leadership to point people to him. And so it's important that we see ourselves as leaders. But here's the distinction that I want to make today, and that is the distinction between good leadership and godly leadership. Those are not always the same thing. Sometimes they are, but they're not always the same thing. And so good leadership is a relative term. Let me give you a few examples of that. So maybe a company would see a good leader as they are efficient. They get the job done. Their team is organized, and they get stuff done, and they make the company the most money. So she's a great leader because her department is the most efficient. So the company would see that's a great leader. But if you talk to her employees, they might say, she's a taskmaster. She is harsh. She is not easy to work with or work for. I would not say she's a good leader. The company would, but maybe the employees would not. So it's a relative term in the workplace. Even a company might see, good leadership as that they just keep things very, they don't get involved in the personal lives of the people that they manage. And so they would say, yeah, that's great that you're kind of cold and standoffish. That's what we want. Keep it, separate in a box. But then again, the people that you work with or for may see like they don't get along with people. Like they're not very friendly or very warm. And so it's kind of hard to really get excited about what we're doing because I don't feel that sort of connection on a personal level with them. So it's a relative term. Even as parents. So sometimes we'll look at a parent whose home is always clean and organized and they're always know what they're doing. They got the spreadsheet of how, the schedule of the day. We might say they're a great leader. And their kids may think, like, I'm in prison here. Like, I can't ever have any spontaneity, can never have any fun, because I got to keep it clean and tidy, and I got to stay in the schedule, and I got to be in the box. So it's a relative term. Sometimes some would see good leadership as this person is always fair, which to them might mean they're by the book. What does this situation call for? Let me look it up in my life manual. It's always this. I'm always going to treat everyone exactly the same in every situation, no matter who they are, no matter what's going on, no matter what the extenuating circumstances might be. But other people, I would say most people on the other end of that are going to see that as probably not great leadership. There's even the football coach, Jimmy Johnson, coached the Dallas Cowboys in the early 90s to a lot of championships. He was not a proponent of treating every player the same. So it's sort of a legend, but he's talked about it and other players have talked about it. So this happened. Basically, he would get on to certain players who would fall asleep in meetings watching film, and he would like rip them a new one, like take him out back and be like, you're benched for the game, or you're going to sit out the first quarter, or whatever. He would discipline them. But if one of his star players happened to doze off, Troy Aikman or Emmitt Smith, he wouldn't really say anything to him. And he was asked about it, and he said, I'm going to treat them all fairly, but not all the same. He saw the distinction in that leadership quality. I can't treat my star quarterback the same as the backup left tackle. I'm just not going to. It wouldn't do me any good. It's not going to do the team any good. And so leadership is a relative term, but godly leadership really has certain parameters that we want to look at today. This is just what it looks like. There's not really a lot of gray area here. It's like, this is godly leadership. And the first thing to understand is that leadership is a gift from God. So when you look at the creation of the world and the creation of mankind, the first thing he really tells them to do is, you're in charge. The first thing is, hey, you're leaders now. I just made you. You have no idea what's going on or anything. You have nothing to base anything off of. You're in charge. Probably why things turned out the way they did, if we're honest. I don't know if maybe God didn't think that one through or not, but anyway, so leadership is God's idea. It's his idea from the very beginning. And like any gift, it should be cared for. Leadership should be stewarded. We should learn to grow and develop in leadership. And this is not just about if you have a position at work or not just about a certain title. Again, we want to see all of us in some ways as leaders in every area of our lives. So this is a trait that we want to grow in and use wisely. I believe God wants to accomplish great things in your life and through your life of leadership. In every area, at home, at work, even here we talked about last week at church, as we're leaders among leaders here. So we want to steward that gift. So the question we want to look at today then is, what does godly leadership look like? What does godly leadership look like? And I'm going to use this sort of analogy throughout today, and that's with cooking. So I do a lot of the cooking at our house. And here's the one thing that I've discovered. Ingredients matter in cooking, right? Ingredients matter. If you leave the coconut out of the coconut cream pie, you just have cream pie, don't you? I mean, I would prefer that, not being a coconut fan, but still, if you leave that main ingredient out of the title of the dish, it's a problem. If you leave the chicken out of chicken and rice casserole, that's a problem. It's not what it says it is. And so ingredients matter. If you leave the yeast out of bread, it's not going to do what you expect it to do, what you want it to do. Ingredients matter. If you leave the pieces of turtle out of turtles, is that not one of the ingredients in turtles? Yeah. Oh, pecans. It's not turtle. Okay, pecans. Got it. I had it wrong the whole time. That was really, okay. So, yeah, if you leave the pecans, I guess, or the turtle meat out of turtles, it's just not going to taste the same. It's not going to have the same sort of effect. So what I want to do today is look at three main ingredients of godly leadership. What are the three? What does this look like? And some of them on their own seem difficult or seem like it's almost too much to ask, or this is above my pay grade, or this is not going to apply to me. But I believe all three of these in any area of life, as we see ourselves as leaders, are important ingredients to leadership. The first ingredient of godly leadership, I believe, is reflection. And by that I mean we are to reflect Christ in all we do. Again, let's go back to the very beginning. Genesis 1 and 2. The first description of humans is as image bearers of God. That's the first way humans are described ever. Genesis 1:27 says this, so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. We are to reflect God in all that we do. Reflect Christ in all that we do, not just to follow him, but to reflect him in our lives of leadership. And so I have kind of three analogies to explain that too, how that looks in our lives to help us understand this. So the first thing really, our lives are to be like moons. So the moon reflects light. It doesn't have light of its own, so it's reflecting the light of the sun, right? Any astronomers in here can verify that for me? All right. So that's what our lives are to look like. We should reflect the light that is coming from the God that we serve and from his son Jesus. That's what it should look like. The second sort of analogy is our lives are kind of like satellites. We want to be in the proper position to get the correct signal to give the proper information about the original source, which is God. We want to be in that proper alignment and position with his Spirit working through us to give the proper, correct information about him. And our lives are meant to be like mirrors. That's the easiest reflection thing, right? To be a mirror. When you look in it, it looks like you. When you hold something up to a mirror, it looks like that image. That's what our lives should look like, to reflect God's goodness, God's character, God's love. That's what our lives of leadership should do. It should be a reflection. But here's the problem. Between Genesis 1 and Genesis 3, something terrible happened. And that was when sin entered into the world. And when that happened, it messed up everything. It ruined everything. And so even all three of these analogies, we see that when our lives are to be like moons that reflect the light of God, well, the problem is sin is like clouds that sort of get in the way. And if there's like a cloudless night and the moon's really bright, you're like, whoa, you notice that, right? And then you notice when there's clouds everywhere and you're like, it is pitch black out here. That's kind of what sin does in our lives. The reflection is not as strong because those clouds sort of get in the way and obscure that reflection. And then with the satellite idea here, it's sort of like sin jams that signal. We're out of proper alignment, so we're not getting the right information in to then give the proper information out. Sin messes up everything, and that's what we see at the beginning. And then with the mirror image, we're supposed to reflect God's image as his image bearers. Sin basically just shatters that mirror to pieces. And it's just not looking the way it should. We're not reflecting God's goodness as we should because sin causes that problem. It gets in the way. And the issue is not just that that happened one time in Genesis 3, and it's not even that it just happens before we become Christ followers. It's still a problem. Sin is still an issue that we all have to wrestle with, even as followers of Jesus. So then what do we do? How do we help to get rid of all those obscurities to then reflect what we're supposed to reflect as Christ followers? The answer is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. Paul writes, "So all of us who have had that veil removed can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. And the Lord, who is the Spirit, makes us more and more like him as we are changed into his glorious image." So the answer to the sin problem that obscures our reflection of God is a closer relationship to Jesus Christ. And that seems very basic and very simple, but it's absolutely the only option. It's not about me trying harder. It's not about me doing more. It's not about me doing the work to change the position of my satellite or to repair the shatters of the mirror, right? Or to remove the clouds away from the moon so I can reflect his light. It's not about what we can do at all. It's about that relationship with Christ kind of fills in those gaps. It dissipates the clouds so we can more brightly reflect the light of God. It helps us to get us in proper position. So it's like maybe a meteor of sin came and knocked us off course, and then Jesus comes in as we draw to him and turn to him in his grace, forgiveness, love, and that relationship. He puts us back in proper alignment so that we can, again, reflect God's image. He repairs what's been broken so we can reflect him better. Everything becomes a little bit better, maybe a little bit easier at times as we grow in that relationship with Jesus. So let me ask this question then. How's your reflectivity this morning? If you were to look at how I'm reflecting God, what maybe grade would you give yourself? What areas is there room for improvement? What are some weaknesses that we're susceptible to sin-wise that we need to really lean into Jesus a little bit more even this week and say, hey, I need help in this area. I need strength in this area. I fall short here, and I need your grace to overcome my weakness so that I can more ably reflect the image of God. That's what we're trying to do, and it's not easy to do that, and so we need the help of the Holy Spirit to do that in our lives, to put us in that position to reflect his goodness. So my encouragement is to let us use our opportunities for leadership in our everyday lives to reflect the image, to be image bearers of God. The second ingredient for everyday godly leadership is this one, and it might be the most difficult of all. I'll put it in the middle here, and that is cultivation. The second ingredient of godly leadership is cultivation. What does that mean? It means this. We're called to create a Christ-like, Christ-centered atmosphere with our lives of leadership. It also means that we're called to use our influence to create an environment everywhere we go that causes spiritual awakening and growth in the lives of others. And that's a mouthful. And when you kind of wrap your head around what that means, you might think that's pretty impossible. So I'm to cultivate an environment of Christ-centeredness, and I don't really have a lot of Christ-centered environments in which to do that. That's the point. The point is that we're changing the atmosphere of the spiritual nature around us through our lives of leadership. We're trying to change the way that people perceive God through our lives every day of leadership. It seems like a tall order, but there's an author who really uses this term, and it reflects this well, and it's being a contagious Christian. That's all that is. It sounds like a lot of mumbo-jumbo. It sounds like a really tall order. I'm supposed to change spiritual atmosphere with my life of leadership. It's being a contagious Christian is maybe an easier way to think of that. Because chances are you don't work at a faith-based job. And so it's going to be a stretch for you to influence that workplace every day. It's going to be difficult. You may be one of the only, or maybe the only Christ follower in your family, and the holidays are coming up, and you're going to think, how am I, over a Thanksgiving meal or over a Christmas holiday, how am I going to influence my family and point them toward Jesus? That seems like an impossible task, but it's not. It's about consistency and faithfulness in our lives of leadership and our faithfulness to our life of faith. Let me give you an example of this from the Old Testament. To kind of illustrate this point. Jeremiah 29, let me read verses 4 through 7 quickly, and then we'll kind of explain the story around it and talk about a man who fit in this storyline. Jeremiah 29, starting at verse number 4. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says to all the captives he has exiled to Babylon from Jerusalem. God says, build homes and plan to stay. Plant gardens and eat the food they produce. Marry and have children, then find spouses for them so that you may have many grandchildren. Multiply, do not dwindle away. And God says, and work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, for its welfare will determine your welfare. So this is a prophecy from Jeremiah, who is declaring God's about to exile his people of Israel to Babylon. They're going to be basically enslaved in Babylon for over 70 years for their disobedience to him. So Jeremiah says, hey, it's coming. And when it does, you're not going to be in your own environment anymore. You're not going to have certain freedoms that you had here that you squandered anyway. When you get there, you're going to be in a foreign land occupied by a foreign government that does not agree with your worship. They do not have the same sort of spiritual standards that you would have. So he says, I'm just setting you up for this. This is about to happen for a couple of generations. You're going to be displaced. But God says, take this as an opportunity for cultivation. He says, hey, work there, live there, love this foreign land as much as you can. He says, work for its welfare will determine your own. So God says, don't complain about the situation. Don't feel overwhelmed by the task at hand. Don't say, this can't be done. God, you're setting us up for something that you're saying you should do this and we can't, and you know, and it's not fair. He says, no, this is an opportunity for leadership in this situation. And there was a man who, when this actually does happen, who did just that. His name was Daniel. Probably know about this guy. He's pretty famous. He was in the middle of this prophecy. So years later, when this happens, Daniel is taken into captivity in Babylon. And so when God says work for the welfare of the city, you would think, well, that's just, a phrase. Well, not for Daniel, it wasn't, because he was a government employee of Babylon. He is literally working for the welfare of a foreign country. He is employed by Babylon. But he, I'm sure, took heed to this advice from the prophet Jeremiah, because he didn't go in to try to sabotage Babylon. He didn't see his mission as a God-fearing Jew in a foreign country. I'm going to go in and just sabotage everything. I'm going to do the work that God says he's going to do. He didn't do that. He also didn't complain about the situation. He did what Jeremiah prophesied years before. He took this as an opportunity for leadership to cultivate this environment through his faith. So what he does is he works for 3 different kings. And each one, the first one has this dream that he cannot figure out. His advisors can't figure out. But then Daniel says, hey, I know the meaning of your dream. And he predicts, or he says, hey, this is what it is. And it was true. And so he is promoted. And then the second king has a similar thing. He has a dream. There's even this story where this mysterious hand comes and writes this message on this wall in the middle of dinner. And they're like, what is going on? What does that say? What does this mean? What is happening? And Daniel says, I know what that means. My God gave me the interpretation of this message. Here's what it means. And it was not a good message, by the way. It was, hey, king, your king is about to be over. Great. That's what God says. But here's the thing. He used his opportunity for leadership and again was promoted. And then even for the third king, I want to read one verse about Daniel here. During the reign of the third king in the life of Daniel, Daniel 6, verse 3, it says this, Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. So he cultivated this atmosphere to use his gifts from God to benefit Babylon. Which is weird, which seems really odd. God, why would you have your people in this place and have your brightest, smartest, most faithful followers help the enemy? And God said, just trust me on this. Because when it comes to, when they would ask questions, how is this happening? Where is this favor coming from? You can point to these faithful Jewish men and women who said, well, it's because God placed us here and I believe it's for this purpose. So then in Daniel 6, verse 3, what we just read, he's going to be promoted to like basically vice president of Babylon, okay? And so his opponents, political opponents, which we don't know anything about those, right? We don't see ads. Hasn't it been great to not see political ads on TV? Oh, thank you, Jesus. All right, so if you could just come back before 2020, Jesus, that would be awesome, just so we don't have to see the ads anymore. Heaven's great, but no ads, you know, maybe the icing on the cake, right? So his opponents decide this cannot happen. This cannot happen. So they devise this plan against the king or against Daniel to the king, and they say, hey, we think it'd be a great idea to test the loyalty of your people, and we have the way to do that. So you should put a 30-day moratorium on prayer to anyone but you, and anyone who breaks that law is thrown into a den of lions, and that's their fate. Knowing Daniel prays at the same time every day. 3 times a day at his window he prays. They know, and they assume he's not going to quit doing that. This is their way to get him, right? And so the king is kind of tricked into this sort of agreement, and he does it, not knowing what's about to happen. And so what happens, you know, Daniel still prays the same time every day. And so in this way, he is sort of subverting things, but he's just doing it out of a life of faithfulness to God, a life of prayer. And so when he prays and he gets caught, the king has no choice but to throw him into the den of lions. But then we know what happens, right? Nothing happens, which is weird. If you're thrown into a pit of lions, there should be nothing but a few bones left in the morning. But the king is kind of up all night, and he's just so concerned about Daniel, his friend. This is not right, and they tricked me, and he kind of gets wise to what's going on. So he goes and checks, and he's like, Daniel? You know, he's just assuming he's not going to hear anything. And Daniel's like, hey, what's up, king? And he's just, you know, petting the little cute kitties and everything. And so it's just amazing. That doesn't happen. So his life of faithfulness cultivated this atmosphere that changed even the king's heart. It did something to the most mighty man in the nation. And it wasn't a subversive move. It wasn't, I'm going to go in from the inside and ninja attack. You know, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to live out my life of faithfulness where I am, with what God's gifted me with, and use my influence the way that I'm able to make a difference. And that's what he did. He had an effect even on the king of that nation through his life of faithfulness. He cultivated the atmosphere. But the key to cultivation is something that's really hard, and that is it takes time. And it does require faithfulness. It doesn't happen overnight. So you're trying to change your sort of atmosphere at work. It's not going to happen tomorrow, okay? This is not like by Thanksgiving Day where yay, it's better, it's great, it's healthier, you know? I have more influence for Jesus. It's going to take some time and faithfulness to see this through. So you have this issue, and next week we're going to talk about leading change. We're talking about 7 keys to leading change in your life. That's next week. So maybe you see in your life, this needs to happen. This needs to change. This cannot happen any longer. It may not happen overnight where this relationship is fixed. It may take some time and faithfulness to do that. You might see a certain thing that you want to try to help, and I can fix it and I can do it. You maybe just have to let it sit for a while. It's going to take time and faithfulness to cultivate this environment that God wants us to cultivate. But a consistent long-haul leadership approach will pay dividends. I believe eventually your positive attitude at work will rub off on others around you. And it could even, like Daniel, even help you out a little bit with that. I believe that a positive, a hard work ethic can have an effect at your workplace. I believe that your infectious personality will get noticed by people in your life. Where does that joy come from? How are you always so positive? How are you always so sure of God's going to take care of you? It's just the life faithfulness that I'm called to live. It will get noticed. It'll take time, but it will. Your sense of joy and peace will be seen as a better way than the others around you are trying to live. And they're going to say, I need some of that. I got to figure out the secret to the sauce there in your life. And it's always pointing people to Jesus. Your faithful life of faith will become noticed over time. It will cultivate a new atmosphere in your life. So we can do that as we live this everyday life of godly leadership. So then the third ingredient as we wrap it up today is this. The third ingredient of godly leadership is replication. Replication. Our reflection plus cultivation hopefully will help to result in replication. So godly leadership is not about us. My life of leadership is not about me getting ahead, not about me getting more advantages. It's about, again, we talked about last week, it's about serving others. That's the key to a life of godly leadership, is serving others. It's for and about them. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. It's when Abram's called by God. He says the same thing. Replication was the key ingredient to Abram. The Lord said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. That sounds awesome, God. I will bless you, love it, and make you famous. Yes, and you will be a blessing to others. That's the key there. A blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on the earth will be blessed through you. Abram's call that started the Jewish race was about replication. So God did say, yeah, I'm going to make you wealthy and famous, and you're going to love it. You're never going to lack. You're never going to worry about anything in your life. You're going to be, sort of a celebrity in ancient times. He said, that's not the point. It's not so I can puff you up or pad your pocketbook. It's so then you can use those things to then help others. It's replication. That was the whole point. So leaders of godliness are meant to be selfless, God-centered, others-focused. And here's the key, though, for our life of faith and our replication. What we're replicating is important. So even the sub-ingredient here is also important. So we're not just replicating more good people through our influence. That's not the key. It's not the point. We're not just helping to make people feel better about themselves or behave in a more moral way. The point is to make them more like Jesus. It's disciples making disciples. It's Christ followers making Christ followers. Now, if along the way they become sort of a better person, that can be good. It can also be a little dangerous because then they're going to feel like I've arrived now in the gospel. I don't need the gospel now. So we're trying to point them, again, to Jesus, to replicate. As we're followers of Christ, we should replicate followers of Christ. And that's found, one more scripture as we close, Matthew 28, verse 18. This is some of the last words Jesus ever says, ever, is this. And that's going to be pretty important. Jesus came and told his disciples, I've been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you, and be sure of this, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Jesus makes it very clear. We're not just making better people or better neighbors or more moral people or people that manage their money better or people that are better employees or better coworkers. That's great, that's good, but it's not the end goal. We're replicating as followers of Christ. We're replicating, or should be, followers of Christ, pointing them to Jesus as the ultimate source for everything, as the ultimate answer for everything, as the ultimate cure for any ailment that they have in any area of life. And just like we talked about a second ago, cultivation takes time. Well, replication takes close proximity. It's going to take us being involved in the lives of other people on a personal level, really getting invested in their lives, in the details of their lives, doing life with them, hand in hand, side by side. And here's the thing, that's risky. Relationships are risky. I can get hurt. I can get offended. I can get upset. What if I'm doing all of the heavy lifting in this relationship and I don't see anything? There's a risk to that. Many times that's why we don't engage in relationship, because of the risk, but that we have to. If we're going to replicate Christ followers, we're going to replicate ourselves into others, it's going to mean taking that risk. Jesus took that risk. He had 12 guys that he devoted and invested his entire ministry into. And one of them is the one that handed him over to the authorities, but he still invested in him. The other ones all ran off at his greatest moment of need. He took a huge risk in investing in people, but in the end, it paid off. Because once they got their head screwed on straight after all this happened and they really put their faith completely in the resurrected Christ, they changed the world. So it was worth the investment to Jesus. It was worth the risk. And I'll go one step further. Every one of us in the room is a risk to Jesus. There's no guarantee. He gave his life, John 3:16, he loved the world, everyone. Most of them are going to reject him. Yet he saw it's worth the risk. It's worth the relational investment to try to replicate myself into them and have them replicate me into others. So we're risky. And Jesus thought it was worth the risk. So these other relationships in our lives, if we want to replicate Christ in them, it's going to be worth the risk in the end, more often than not. And that's what it takes to replicate Jesus in others. So the recipe to a powerful life of godly leadership: reflection, reflect the heart, the light, the love of God. Cultivation, use your faithful life of faith to change the atmosphere, to influence things around us as best as we can. And then replication, that we're trying to help to build other Christ followers through our everyday life of leadership. That's the call, that's the mission to this godly life of leadership.